We are ready for our last interview for the day and then one more talk to go. So please join me in welcoming Sergey Nazarov of Chainlink to talk about the future of how oracles have been evolving. Right, without further ado, let's welcome Sergey on stage. Sergey, super excited to officially chat with you on stage. We've done a lot of these informal chats, but never when it's been recorded.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always great to speak with you, Kartik, and great work to everyone and you on putting this together, as well as the hackathon. I think it's a real achievement where you've gotten ETHGlobal and kind of the scale and the amount of insight people get from this.
Really appreciate that. I want to talk about the history of Chainlink to start, and we'll kind of go into sort of what's up and coming and what you've been working on. So I'm curious on how did actually Chainlink begin, and what made you actually start this as a protocol?
Yeah, sure. So we were building something called smartcontract.com in 2014 and 2015, basically when Ethereum was forming. And there were all these different theories about what smart contracts were. Ethereum emerged and did a very good job at creating the on-chain part of smart contracts, so the blockchain itself, and the smart contract state machine on-chain being a flexible kind of thing. And a number of people said, you know, let's compete with that, let's make competing chains. That really wasn't our view, because we felt that Ethereum was doing a good job in creating a good on-chain state machine. And so we knew from building smartcontract.com that oracles were a critical part of making on-chain state machines useful.
And this is purely just the notion that you want to be able to query data outside of a blockchain to use it somehow? Or was it more specific at that point?
It's not just querying the data. So what Oracle networks do, Oracle networks is what Chainlink basically invented and originated. And what Oracle networks do is they generate consensus about non-blockchain things. So blockchains generate consensus about whatever is going on in the code of the state machine and whatever the record is in the blockchain kind of data structure thing. Oracle networks generate consensus about everything else. So if you want to generate consensus about market data, weather data, if you want to generate consensus about off-chain computation that isn't on-chain, if you want to generate consensus about cross-chain interactions. So the goal was not just to create a simple, dumb connection between two places. It was to get that connection to the point of verifying and proving the validity of whatever you were connected to the degree that it can control the value in the contract. That's kind of the standard that we sought out to meet. And we saw a lot of people building chains, but we didn't see many people figuring out how do you verify things and make them guaranteed, cryptographically guaranteed, consensus-driven. And then that led to a lot of data basically going onto Ethereum. We were, I think, the first ones to put market data on Ethereum, and then that connected with the need for market data from DeFi. But that's just one small example of how verified data of a specific type gives birth to a specific type of smart contract. In that case, DeFi. So DeFi was really where Chainlink ended up booming, and it was a sub 100 million in total value locked industry when we started, with maybe 10, 15 total systems, protocols, total teams across the whole ecosystem. And then it grew to over 200 billion, with Chainlink powering the vast majority of those protocols that needed external data. So that was the first thing that kind of proved that the ability to verify information as an Oracle network was very important. And so far, the system has now enabled over 10 trillion in transaction value, primarily through DeFi, primarily on the market data side. But it all kind of emerged from this need for smart contracts to interact with other systems, starting with data, moving on to other types of data, and now into the cross-chain world, which has the same set of security concerns.
Was it always clear to you back then that price feed is just the first step, and you kind of had to evolve it to something more? Or was that the goal, or rather, like, was it natural that you kind of decided to expand it, or was that like not even known as a problem, because you started when Ethereum wasn't even fully mainnet yet, and anticipating what the world would look like a few years down the road may not have been that easy of a task.
Yeah, it's not super easy, but our view was always that smart contracts have this term, this word smart, and smart in traditional web world land means connected. So the direction from which we approached smart contracts circa 2014-15 was connected things, like smart homes, smart cars, smart cards. Smart means connected. And when we realized that smart contracts were not connected, that is a big gap that we sought to fill. Price data was simply the first place where that gap met real demand. And then the system expanded, far beyond that. But yeah,
so maybe let's jump right into that. So how has it evolved since then? Now you're kind of powering data for a lot of things, and it's just a broader platform. Walk us through the last few years of the evolution.
Sure. So market data was the first big category of data that, once aggregated and made verifiable, gives birth to DeFi. That was kind of a big moment for both DeFi and Chainlink, and I think the crypto world. Then the next question was, what other categories of data can give birth to more smart contract types? And then we started putting all kinds of data on chain. Weather data, gaming-related data, all kinds of data. Then we realized that proof of reserves was a big use case. And so proof of reserves has been live on Chainlink for, I think, over 3, maybe over 4 years. And in terms of the amount of applications and the amount of value secured, it's by far the largest provider of proof of reserves. And now you have proof of reserves being used by external non-crypto companies as well.
And this is just so we understand, proof showing that I have this money on chain from some other party?
Yeah, this is verifying that something is happening a certain way in an external system, but not about piece of price data, but about the solvency. So proof of reserves is really the beginning of proof of everything and anything you want to prove to a counterparty for them to transact with you. Usually for them to manage risk. So proof of liabilities, proof of solvency, proof of the carbon credit is valid, proof of whatever, right? Proof of everything, really. So then after that, identity was another area where Chainlink started to do a lot of work, because identity is important for proving things about the people involved in transactions. Basically, I started to view Chainlink as a set of off-chain systems that create trust minimization, that verify things in a way that allow trust minimized data, trust minimized identity, trust minimized proof of solvency, reserves, whatever, to be injected into on-chain transactions that allow those on-chain transactions to both come into existence and become useful. Then the next question was actually computation. How do you get various off-chain computations, such as automation computations, commonly around even things like time, right? Telling contracts what time it is so they can operate in accordance with like the timing of certain transactions. So then automation was released, a random number generation system was released, then functions was released, which is a slightly more advanced, well, much more advanced computation system. But the point of all those computations is to inject additional computation into blocks, right? Into blockchains, L1s, L2s, and so on. And to do computations that blockchains don't do, can't do, don't want to do, but to do it in a trust minimized way. And then the third category, which went live last year, also at an ETH event at ETHCC, was CCIP, the cross-chain interoperability protocol, which really fundamentally is a similar security problem. So Oracle networks solve the security problem of how do you get different nodes to come to consensus about something that a blockchain will not come to consensus on for you. And that includes data, that includes various computations, and now that includes cross-chain connectivity. And because Chainlink has so successfully secured trillions of dollars in throughput, and the security model of Oracle networks that obviously works for securing value of different types and data transmission of different types, the cross-chain problem is actually a very similar problem. Right, because you're moving data across chains and you're moving value across chains, but the value takes the form of data, basically. So it's actually the same fundamental problem of how do you connect external data sources and how do you connect blockchains. At this point, Chainlink's goal, in my opinion, is to be the system that brings everything into blockchains, out of blockchains, and between blockchains, right? So the question is, how does all the information and value flow into chains? How does information and value flow out of chains? How does information and value flow between chains? That's the fundamental question. What Chainlink doesn't do is it doesn't have a chain, doesn't create a chain, it doesn't make blocks. That is something that Ethereum does very well, the Ethereum 2.0 L2 model does very well. The need is, how do you inject various pieces of data and connectivity into that L1 and those L2s, and how do you allow that to create more transactions that have value?
Is there more to simplifying cross-chain connectivity this way? Or is CCIP like the final version of it, or do you think this is just the start and there's a lot more enhancements that you can add to this new interoperable world?
I mean, it's definitely just the start. I think there's a lot of cool features. CCIP has like the ability to do what we call programmable token transfers, where you can get CCIP to enact functions, to actually trigger functions on other L2s and other chains, without you having to go to that chain and make a wallet or be part of that kind of process of integrating with that chain. So there's there's a huge list of features that are coming down the road. Part of those features relate to Web3. Part of those features relate to the capital markets and enterprises. And really, I think CCIP is trying to also connect those two worlds with Ethereum and L2s kind of in the middle as the layers that do those transactions. And to do those transactions, you do need that connectivity and that data. Otherwise, just like DeFi didn't happen before oracles, you're not going to have other categories of transactions without that data and connectivity.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, CCIP seems super powerful. So maybe one other question I have on this is, how do we kind of think about applying this thing for real-world assets and just actually merging public and private blockchains, if that's a use case in a category that you think is big enough for this to be used for?
Yeah, so I think the push towards L2s that Ethereum has now created has made a set of technologies that enterprises and capital markets participants can adopt, and can adopt pretty efficiently. Blockchain technology circa 2014 and 15 was really, really hard to adopt. Blockchain technology circa 2017, 18 was also very hard. Blockchain technology circa 21, 22 is much, much better, right? Which is kind of the start of the L2 dynamic. And now that dynamic is getting polished into something that can be adopted relatively quickly by various enterprises, the biggest banks, the biggest asset managers. So I think we're kind of going to a world where all the biggest banks, all the biggest asset managers will end up having their own chains, their own L2s. And all those chains will then need data, and they'll need connectivity. And they'll need that, and they'll want that connectivity to public Ethereum in order to transact. And so I think
maybe just out of curiosity, is that a prediction, or are you already seeing demand for this thing and it's just a matter of time?
No, that's a definite thing. So it's a definite thing that all the banks, all the asset managers, all the enterprises will end up spinning up their own L2s. Then they'll end up connecting those L2s between each other. Then they'll end up connecting them to public chains. And this is hugely beneficial to the larger crypto community, because the more value that gets on chain, the more value eventually flows into public Ethereum. Because eventually that is probably the biggest single network where there's the most private keys, the most people interacting, or the most systems interacting. But they're interacting in the Ethereum 2.0 model through the L2s, right? So the question is, if everyone spins up all these different chains of their own, how do they connect all those chains? How do they get data into those chains? How do transactions between those chains happen? How do those transactions eventually flow onto Ethereum to happen on there? And how does the data for those transactions go on there as well? So those are kind of the questions we're working through. And actually the amount of data and the complexity of the transactions that you see coming from bigger, more established firms is larger because they have more requirements. Like they have a hard requirement of having to add identity to a transaction. They have a hard requirement that the asset has to do mark-to-market, has to settle every day. The reason this is super duper relevant is because the whole crypto thing is just driven by net new users. Yep. And the net new users that we're going to get from the Web 2 community converting to the Web 3 community and different parts of the world realizing that cryptocurrency and blockchains are a thing, That is in the mid to late stages of understanding, because almost every country you go in, I feel there is at least a 10 to 20% penetration of crypto. And in other countries, it's like
much higher,
50 to 80%. So where are all the net new users? Where's the net new value going to come from? Some of it will come from getting from that 10 to 20% in those places to the 80 or 90% of those places. But a lot of it will come from the systems that already have the value inside of them, but are simply not connected to blockchains and not connected to Ethereum and not able to transact on it yet. And so that's, I think, a valuable, worthwhile problem.
I mean, that's a really good world that I would like to live in. If you think that's very close, that's even better, because this definite thing about being banks wanting to do this on L2s and actually go to Ethereum is very optimistic news. Maybe kind of switching gears a bit and zooming out. You've been in this space for over 10 years, and this is also even before Ethereum existed. So I'm curious about how, from your perspective, have things kind of evolved and changed, and how do you look at this space now versus 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago? Has there anything been surprising to you? Has anything been off or just exceeded your expectations, or just kind of what's a good reflection of the last decade for you?
I think there are really kind of three groups of people that I've noticed. There are people who build systems and juice them to massive amounts of value secured in order to make profit. And the security of the system and other considerations are not particularly large. And what that does is it shows that the system has value, because that's where a lot of use cases come from, because the profit motive of those groups is very high. Then I see folks that want to build kind of a next generation infrastructure. I think that's a lot of this community. I think it's how do you build a next generation infrastructure that replaces the old generation infrastructure on various dimensions. And then those two groups, those first two groups kind of interact. And then there's a third group, and the third group is just, what would be called the normies, I think, online. The people that don't understand the first or the second group, that are waiting to see value from the Web3 world. I think what I've basically seen is very big boom and bust cycles across all three groups that sometimes intersect and sometimes don't, that most groups don't understand. So the group that's like, I'm here to make money, I'm here to ship a protocol and make money and get the most TVL and get the best yield and make the most money and get the best fees, and that's just like what I want to do. I feel that they need to think about security more, they need to interact more with the infrastructure community, and they need to understand some of those infrastructure trends, which is part of what we help that community a lot with. The infrastructure community, the people who want to build the technology, I feel like they need to understand some of the use cases better that the infrastructure is meant to serve. Because sometimes the infrastructure that's being built is not being targeted against the use cases. We always try to do this as much as possible, because our experience has been that once the protocol does something useful for a useful use case, then a lot of great things happen. The protocol does something interesting, but it doesn't create a useful use case, then the world just continues as if nothing happened. And then the third group, the kind of Web 2, non-crypto, capital markets, normie thing, I think those people are still waiting to see tangible value. I think a lot of them are still waiting to see tangible value.
You think this is just skepticism, or and also obviously truthful that there's not tangible value for them to kind of perceive?
I think our industry is confusing to people from the outside. I think it takes a decent amount of effort to understand what's a good DeFi protocol versus a bad DeFi protocol. I think it's difficult to differentiate a scam from a real product. I think the user experience is very difficult. The user experience for a Web 2 user that doesn't want to spend time thinking about anything, which is what
most of them,
which is normies. That's what makes normies normies, is they don't want to dive in deeply beyond like the first level of complexity. They just kind of give up. Our ability to allow them to interface with all this value is still limited. I think it's massively improving, so don't get me wrong. I think that divide...
But it's justified that it's not a great experience and there's no obvious value that they see.
Yeah, so I think this whole industry has a huge amount of room to grow, right? Because the user experience is going to improve and bring more people in. The capital markets, the enterprise interfaces are going to improve, and all the value from those systems are going to flow in. But I think fundamentally the community of people that want to make applications and the community of people that make infrastructure should interface more, so that the infrastructure actually forces a lack of scams from the I want to make money, I want to make applications that make money community, and the community that wants to make money by making applications is doing a better job informing what the infrastructure technologies do, which is what the interaction we always try to have with the DeFi community and the GameFi community and so on. And then if that cycle gets, it already moves relatively fast, but it can always move faster. And then you have the third group of user experience, right, where the user experience of Web3 should be as good, as simple, as fast, as lacking complexity as the Web 2 experience. Because people seem to believe that somehow, because it's Web 3, people should be willing to go through more pain to use it.
Which should not be the case.
That doesn't make any sense. Normal people don't do that. They're like water. They just go down the path of least resistance, unless there's like a huge incentive. And unfortunately, the incentives are very variable, right? It's like huge DeFi yield, no DeFi yield, huge DeFi yield, no DeFi yield, 16 scams in the middle that no one could tell were scams, and like half the people lost their money and half the people got rich. That's not a great environment, right?
Or a consistent one.
It's not a consistent environment for normal people. So if we make it consistent, if the infrastructure, Ethereum does a good job at forcing, certain clarity and security guarantees. Oracle networks create certain clarity and security guarantees. Certain protocols disclose certain things like proof of reserves and other things that make it clear that they're reliable to a certain degree. So if we get everything to that level, to this level of assurance that if you put money and you put value and you put your time into using this thing, you're not going to lose it, you're not going to get scammed. And then if you also have the usability increase, right, significant improvement in usability, then this is how the world works. Because everybody looking at it is like, this is obviously how I want the world to work, but my
this is what they're used to too. Like, this is their default anyway. They're just now getting access to more features like actually ownership of their assets or just more resistance to somebody taking it away and the actual benefits of Web3 that we want to offer.
Yeah, that's generally what I ask people. Whenever I explain this to them, I say, imagine if I can give you an application with a certain speed, a certain cost, and a certain feature set. And then I can give you the same application with the same cost, same speed, same feature set, but it has this cryptographic guarantee that you can't be screwed. No one can steal your money, no one can mess with you, no one can change the rules of how the value in that application works. Suddenly, every rational agent, every person who understands the question, always says, that second application sounds way better. And that's really what we need to create, right? We need to create all of those conditions where that second application comes into existence, and there is this interaction between the application creators and the infrastructure kind of developers and protocols and so on. And that interaction has been going well, but really I think that whatever that interaction is, it should get you to that second type of application, right? It should get you to an application that has all the same speed, all the same costs or lower, all the same usability or better, and cryptographic guarantees where no one can steal your shit, no one can steal your money, no one can mess with your application, right? That's what I see this whole thing being about. It's not about any one particular use case, it's about all the world's data, all the world's ownership, all the world's transactions, whether that's ad networks or equities or commodities or global trade or whatever, or gaming transactions functioning in that way. And we kind of just have to get it to that point.
But there's hope and we're nearly there. Would you say that's a fair statement, or do you think there's a lot more work to be done?
I think this whole thing became inevitable when it crossed 200 billion. That's my personal view. So when it was sub 200 billion, there was still a lot of views that it wouldn't exist, it wouldn't continue, something wouldn't work out, something would go bad, the security would fail.
That's a good point. The number of hacks kept going up, and now we're just in a more...
There were hacks, there was the DAO, there was some other stuff. It wasn't a market that kind of, you could say, reached what you would call escape velocity. in the more economic or like startup-y terminology on the economic side. I think after 200 billion, it's inevitable, basically. I think the question is, how do we learn from the security failures, from the various data-related failures? Like FTX, for example, for me, is a data-related failure where information was not disclosed, and because it wasn't disclosed, a lot of people learned it all at once, and there was some kind of failure, right? So how do we learn from the various failures in our industry, and how do the applications build better applications by proving more through things like proof of reserves, by providing more data, by being built in more secure, reliable ways? And then how do the infrastructure protocols make it so that's how it works, right? How do the infrastructure protocols provide more infrastructure options for developers to prove things about themselves, to generate reliable data, to generate reliable proofs about their application in a way that people can truly trust that application, not because some developer told them something or a website says something, but because it's verifiable, right? So I think 200 billion was escape velocity. I think it's very, very hopeful for the people that have been here since like before 2014. I mean, it's a dream come true where this is. Like this whole room, by the way, like before 2014, like this would have been half the crypto community or something in a city like London. Like this would have been it. This would have been everybody.
The first DEF CON in London was less than 50 people, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's exactly what I mean. So when you start kind of at that point, from there everything is kind of going well. Basically,
it's all about perspective, looks like.
Because when you were there and everybody just had like cheap pizza and there were like 50 people and
those were the only people that knew about
that even understood. Like you, I remember I would tell people, "What are you doing?" I wouldn't even say blockchain stuff. I would say I'm doing Bitcoin stuff, related stuff, because blockchain didn't exist as a concept, because Ethereum didn't exist, none of this existed, and they would equate that to drug markets, because the only thing
Silk Road.
It was just drug. Yeah, Silk Road.
That's all there was. Yeah.
I would be like, "Hey, it's Sergey. So what are you up to?" I'm doing Bitcoin related stuff, and half the people would ask me, "So the thing on the news, right? The Silk Road drug thing." I'd be like, "No, not the Silk Road drug thing. It's like this global system for payments, does all this cool stuff. It's probably going to do a lot more. There's a blockchain thing in there somewhere." So I mean, when you start there, you know,
$200 billion seems like a pretty good win.
It's all kind of an improvement, unless like those few days every couple of years where shit goes really wrong because someone built an application that wasn't really trustworthy. And then we all have to pay the price because their application that wasn't trustworthy lost a lot of money. That's the stuff we really need to stop. We really need to stop doing that if we want people to take this seriously, because they have a valid point. And then the usability thing, right? So if we have a good track record for securing things, verifying things to people that they work a certain way, and the usability gets to where it needs to be, this is the way the world works. If we don't do those two things, then, you know, it'll probably still be the way the world works, but it'll take a few decades rather than a few years.
It won't grow. And if there's one thing that we do want is finally people to actually help tell us, how do we actually make this even better? I think that's a really good distillation of the last 10 years. I mean, you've been in this space longer than even I have, and just seeing all that world kind of come from people just excited about Bitcoin going to $1 or $2 to now millions of users and billions of dollars of assets issued. It's a no small thing. So I think we should be proud of where we are, and it looks like Chainlink played a massive role in helping actually put all these assets to be on chain and do so in a way that others can actually leverage in a more trusted way. So thank you for that. And I think this is a great note to end this panel on, or discussion on. So
yeah, and thank you for all these great events. I'm a big fan of them. I think they're extremely well made. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and for all the hard work you do building these applications. I think at the end of the day, that's what's really driving the future of all this. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Sergey.